My name is Cora Whitmore, and I was 29 when I finally understood that some families do not break your heart all at once. They do it slowly, one favor at a time. Growing up, everything in our house revolved around my older brother, Mark. Mark was athletic, loud, charming in that effortless way people forgive before he even apologizes. Teachers loved him, neighbors praised him. My parents looked at him like he had personally hung the moon above our roof. I was different, quiet, careful. The kind of daughter who noticed when the electric bill sat unopened on the kitchen counter, or when Mom's smile got tight at the grocery checkout. I started working part-time in college because I thought helping made me useful. Then useful became expected. Then expected became invisible. Whenever money was tight, my parents called me. Not Mark. Never Mark. If the car needed repairs, I paid half. If the mortgage was late, I loaned money I never saw again. If Dad had a medical bill, Mom would sigh into the phone until I offered before she even asked. And every time, I told myself the same lie. This is what family does. The clearest proof came during Mark's wedding to Sarah. The wedding was ridiculous. White roses spilling over every table, a live band flown in from another state, champagne towers, custom lighting, photographers moving around like it was a royal ceremony. My parents acted proud, but I could see the panic underneath. They wanted everyone to believe we were wealthier than we were. A week before the wedding, Mom called me into the kitchen. Dad was sitting at the table, rubbing his forehead. "The catering deposit is due tomorrow," Mom said softly. I already knew where it was going. "How much?" I asked. She didn't even look embarrassed. $8,000. That was money I had saved for myself. Money I had guarded through overtime shifts, cheap meals, and years of telling myself I would eventually build something that belonged to me. But Dad looked tired. Mom looked desperate. And Mark was upstairs laughing on the phone with Sarah about honeymoon resorts. So I transferred the money. Mom only nodded and said, "Good. Money helps." Not "thank you," not "we'll pay you back," just "money helps." After the wedding, I felt hollow. Everyone praised Mark and Sarah. Everyone told my parents what a beautiful event it had been. I stood near the dessert table in a navy dress I had bought on clearance, smiling while people complimented flowers I helped pay for. No one knew. Or maybe they did, and it simply didn't matter. A few weeks later, while driving home from my dull office job, I saw the building. It sat at the edge of town, half hidden behind weeds, with a faded "for sale" sign leaning in the cracked window. The paint was peeling. The roof sagged slightly. It looked forgotten by everyone, which was probably why I slowed down. The price on the sign said $12,900. I laughed at first because I thought it had to be a mistake, but I called the number anyway. The seller told me the place came as is, full of junk, no repairs, no guarantees. Most people had walked away after seeing the inside. I didn't. When he unlocked the door, dust rolled out, like the building had been holding its breath for years. Broken chairs, cardboard boxes, rusted tools, old lamps, cracked mirrors, stacks of dishes wrapped in yellowed newspaper. It smelled like mold and time. But standing there, I saw something else. A small antique shop, warm lights, restored furniture, odd little treasures with handwritten tags. A place where unwanted things could be seen again. Maybe that was why I couldn't stop thinking about it. I used what little money I had left and bought the building. I didn't tell my parents. I knew they wouldn't understand. Worse, I knew they would ask why I had money for a dump, but not for whatever Mark needed next. For weeks, I spent my evenings there. I wore old jeans, tied my hair back, and dragged out trash until my arms ached. I found a vintage lamp under a pile of broken frames, a rocking chair that creaked but held firm, a set of porcelain dishes wrapped in newspaper from the 1980s. Little by little, the building began to feel less dead. Then came the family dinner. Mark and Sarah were there, still glowing from wedding attention. Sarah showed Mom photos from the reception, while Mark bragged about gifts they had received. Dad cleared his throat and mentioned Bora Bora. Mom's voice lowered, but not enough. A proper honeymoon is important after all the stress they've been through. I stared at my plate. My stomach tightened. Then Mom looked directly at me. Since you were so helpful with the wedding, Cora, we thought you could handle the honeymoon expenses too. It's only right. Mark deserves a proper trip. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Mark leaned back in his chair, like this was already decided. Sarah looked down, uncomfortable, but silent. I set my fork down. I can't. Mom blinked. Excuse me? I used my savings, I said carefully. I bought an old store. I'm fixing it up. I want to open an antique and oddities shop. The silence was instant. Then Mom's face twisted. A junk store? It's not junk, I said. Mark laughed under his breath. Of course. Cora buys trash and calls it a dream. Heat rushed to my face, but I kept my voice steady. It's a chance to build something for myself. Dad shook his head slowly, disappointment heavy in every movement. We were counting on you to help your brother. Something inside me cracked. Why is it always my responsibility to pay for Mark's life? Mom's eyes sharpened. Don't be dramatic. I helped with the wedding. I've helped with bills for years. But I cannot keep sacrificing my future so Mark can have everything handed to him. Mark scoffed. You're acting like a victim because you bought a dump. Mom stood then, her chair scraping against the floor. If that's how you feel, she said coldly, maybe you're not part of this family after all. You're just useless trash. The words landed so hard, I forgot how to breathe. Dad looked away. Mark rolled his eyes. Sarah whispered, Mark. But he ignored her. I stood up with trembling hands. Fine, I said. If that's what I am to you, then I'm done trying to prove otherwise. No one stopped me when I left. That night, I sat alone in my apartment with the lights off, still hearing Mom's voice. Useless trash. But somewhere beneath the pain, something small and sharp woke up inside me. They thought I had bought garbage. They had no idea I had bought my way out. The first few days after the fallout with my family felt unreal. I kept replaying that dinner in my head while I worked. Mom's face twisted with disgust. Dad refusing to look at me. Mark smirking like my humiliation was entertainment. Useless trash. The words followed me everywhere. But every evening after work, I unlocked the door to that crumbling building, and for a few hours, I could breathe again. The place was still a disaster. Rainwater leaked through part of the ceiling. Dust coated every surface. Broken furniture leaned against walls like exhausted ghosts. Some nights I stood in the middle of the mess, wondering if I had completely ruined my life. Then I would grab another trash bag and keep going. Because if I stopped moving, I would start thinking. I spent hours hauling ruined junk outside, sorting through boxes, scrubbing years of grime from the windows. My hands blistered, my shoulders burned. I fell asleep on an old cot in the back office more than once because I was too tired to drive home. But slowly, tiny things started changing. The floor appeared beneath the clutter. Light came through the windows. The building stopped feeling abandoned. One evening, while digging through a stack of warped wooden crates, I found an old brass lamp buried under newspapers. The shade was cracked, but after cleaning it and replacing the bulb, the warm amber light transformed the entire room. I stared at it for a long time. Funny how one repaired thing could change the feeling of a place. A few days later, my phone buzzed while I was sanding down an old coffee table. Mark, you're seriously doing this junk store thing? Mom says you're losing it. You could have helped the family instead of wasting money on trash. I stared at the message while dust settled across my jeans. Normally, I would have replied instantly, defended myself, explained my reasoning, tried to make him understand. But suddenly, I felt exhausted by the idea. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the table. For once, I didn't owe anyone an explanation. That night, I called Ethan. My boyfriend had known my family long enough to see through all of them. He never openly criticized them before because he knew I still craved their approval. But after the dinner disaster, even he stopped pretending. "You okay?" he asked quietly after answering. I sat on the floor beside a pile of vintage records. Not really. I finally told him everything. The honeymoon demand. Mom calling me trash. Dad staying silent. When I finished, Ethan let out a slow breath. "They've treated you like the family ATM for years, Cora." I rubbed my forehead. I keep wondering if maybe I overreacted. "No," he said immediately. "You finally reacted." The silence after that hit harder than any speech. Because deep down, I knew he was right. I had spent years making myself smaller to keep everyone else comfortable. And somehow, it still wasn't enough. The next morning, I painted a sign by hand. Second chances, antiques, and oddities. I hung it outside while standing on a shaky ladder, my hands covered in teal paint. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. The sign wasn't just for the store. It was for me. After that, I started posting renovation updates online, mostly because Ethan suggested it. "People love transformation videos," he told me while helping move an old bookshelf. "Before and after stuff gets attention." So I uploaded short clips. Dust-covered rooms turning clean. Broken mirrors restored. An old jukebox sputtering back to life after hours of repairs. I didn't expect anyone to care. But they did. A local blogger shared one of my videos with the caption, "Giving forgotten things a second life." Then, comments started pouring in. "This place looks magical already. I want to visit when you open. My grandfather used to restore radios like this. You're inspiring me to fix up my mom's old furniture." Every notification felt surreal. Strangers were showing me more kindness than my own family had in years. One afternoon, while cleaning the storefront windows, a woman around 60 peeked through the glass. "You open yet?" she asked. "Not yet," I laughed, still trying to make it look less haunted. She smiled warmly. "My grandmother used to own a little antique shop. This reminds me of her." Something about that nearly made me emotional. "I hope you'll come back once we open." "Oh, I will," she said before walking away. "We." I realized she had said "we," like she already believed this place belonged in town. By the end of the month, the building barely resembled the abandoned shell I bought. The floors were polished. The walls repainted a soft teal. Shelves lined with restored trinkets and mismatched porcelain. A little reading corner with the repaired rocking chair and brass lamp. The space finally felt alive. Ethan showed up one evening, carrying pizza and beer. The second he stepped inside, he stopped. "Cora," he said slowly. "This place is beautiful." I laughed awkwardly. "It still needs work." "No," he said firmly. "It has heart." Those words stayed with me all night. Heart. Not perfect, not expensive, not impressive in the way my parents understood success, but real. We sat on the floor eating pizza while an Elvis song crackled softly from the restored jukebox. "You know what's funny?" Ethan said. "What?" "Your family looked at this building and saw garbage, but you looked at it and saw potential." I glanced around the shop quietly. Maybe that was the difference between us. My family only valued things already polished and admired. I had spent my whole life loving broken things because I understood what it felt like to be overlooked. A few days later, I got another message from Mark. "Saw your store online. Mom says you're embarrassing the family now." This time, I didn't even feel hurt. Just tired. I blocked his number. And the second I did, I felt strangely lighter. Like I had finally locked a door that should have been closed years ago. The grand opening date crept closer, faster than expected. I barely slept the night before. What if nobody came? What if everyone online lost interest? What if my parents were right? By morning, my stomach was in knots. Ethan kissed my forehead before helping me arrange the final display near the window. "You built this with your own hands," he said softly. "Be proud of that." At exactly 10 o'clock, I unlocked the front door. For a few terrifying minutes, nothing happened. Then the little bell above the entrance chimed. An elderly woman walked in first. Then a young couple. Then 2 college girls excitedly pointing at the vintage cameras. Within an hour, the shop was buzzing. People laughed near the jukebox.
Okay.
Customers
I
asked
play
questions about restored
What do I
furniture.
play? I started
Someone
here.
bought the porcelain dishes I almost threw away during cleanup.
Did I play that
I stood
console?
behind the counter, overwhelmed, barely able to process what I was seeing. Then,
Yeah,
something
then.
even crazier happened. A local
What did I
reporter
play?
walked through the door
Oh,
holding
someone
a
over
camera.
here. Yeah, so I
"Are
was
you Cora Whitmore?"
playing.
she asked. I blinked. "Yes?" "We've been seeing a lot about your store
I don't have any
online.
no terrain.
Mind if we do a small feature?" My pulse nearly stopped. The reporter interviewed me beside the front window while customers browsed behind us. "What inspired you to open this place?" she asked. I looked around at the shelves, the repaired furniture, the old objects people had discarded. Then I answered honestly. Because not
Nothing of
everything
interest is the
abandoned
polar
is
bear at
worthless.
my
The
blind.
reporter
Is
smiled
it
slightly,
frozen
like she
ocean
understood there was more
or
behind that
a
sentence than I
snowy
said aloud.
tempest spawn?
By the time the store closed that evening, my feet hurt, my voice was gone, and half the inventory had sold. But when I
I
locked
see
the
an
front
ocean,
door and
some
turned
enchanting
around to
around
look
this
at the
river.
shop, glowing warmly in the dark, something inside me shifted.
Hopefully I'll get some
For the
sun.
first time in my life, I wasn't surviving for someone else's approval. I was building something that belonged to me. A few weeks after the grand opening, the store exploded online. The local news segment aired on a Friday night, and by Saturday morning, people were lined up outside before I even unlocked the door. Customers from neighboring towns came just to see the junk store everyone was talking about. Except it wasn't junk anymore. It was alive. Young couples bought restored furniture for their apartments. Collectors searched through vintage radios and old vinyl records.
I need
Elderly customers wandered through the aisles, smiling at memories they hadn't thought about in decades. And
not
every
settle.
single time someone told me,
Actually,
"This
I'm
place feels
breaking-
special," I remembered my mother calling it trash.
Okay, we'll see if I can
Ethan
get
became my anchor through all of it.
restoration.
He helped unload inventory, fixed shelves, and stayed late counting receipts beside me while old music played through the jukebox. One night while we were closing up, he looked around the packed shop and smiled. "You know what your family hates most?" he asked. "What?" "You proved them wrong without needing them." That hit harder than I expected. Because he was right. The more successful the store became, the less I cared whether my parents approved. Then, one afternoon, Chloe showed up, looking nervous. "Mom's been watching your interviews online," she admitted quietly. "Dad, too. They just don't know how to talk to you anymore." I laughed softly. That sounds like their problem. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a message from Dad. Can your mother and I visit the store this weekend? I stared at it for a long time before replying. Sure. When they arrived, they looked uncomfortable the second they walked inside. Mom slowly glanced around the shop at the polished shelves, the crowded displays, the customers laughing near the front counter. Dad touched one of the restored tables carefully. You did all this yourself? He asked. Yeah, I answered calmly. Mom's eyes landed on the sign hanging near the register. Not everything broken is worthless. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then, Dad cleared his throat. You did good, Cora. The words felt strange coming from him. Mom looked down before quietly adding, It's nicer than we expected. Not an apology. Not even close. But for the first time in my life, they were looking at me without disappointment. And surprisingly, I didn't need it anymore. After they left, Ethan wrapped an arm around my shoulders while we watched customers browse through the shop. You okay? He asked. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I said. I think I finally am. Because the real victory wasn't making my family proud. It was realizing I could still build a beautiful life even after they failed to love me the way I deserved.